Welcome back for the Chapter 2, Part 2, Video 2 for exam review. When we left off, we were in the middle of solving proportions, so we'll come back to 7, 8, and 9, but let's go to 10 and 11 when we're in the middle of proportions, and we'll come back to those other two. So on 10 and 11, they give you proportions. You guys are champion proportion solvers. Remember the other day, somebody was showing us how we need to multiply those and get one part, and these and get one part. But in these, what we want to remember is if there's more than one item being done in a part, it's going to need parentheses when it goes in our cross product. So 4 times x can go in just as they are. But this green one, the 5 times that quantity, needs to go into your equation as 5 times everything in that numerator, and then you can keep solving to get your x. In number 11, you can see that we've got 2 sets of things that each have 2 terms. So when we go to do cross products, we're going to need to make sure that there's a parentheses around each of those. So my yellow cross products will be 7 times the amount, x minus 1. And the other cross product will be 3 multiplied by the entire denominator. So on your pink sheets, they talk about times the quantity of, and that's what they're talking about here. Well, let's go back up to 7, 8, and 9. In 7, 8, and 9, these aren't proportions. These aren't percent proportions. These are ones where you're getting a variable alone. So what these really are is SADMEPS problems. Because you need to try to undo the equation the way it's written in order to get a variable alone. So when I look at number 7, I see a lot of multiplication happening. So I'm going to rewrite it so we can see that. To that variable L that we're supposed to get alone. When they say 4L, that means by the time we're done, it's got to be in L equals form. So what I notice is in SADMEPS, there's nothing to add or subtract to get terms away from the side that L is on, but there are things to multiply and divide. There are 2 multipliers on the letter L in this equation, so therefore I have 2 things I'll have to divide off both sides to get L by itself. So slowing down so I can make sure that I go through that SADMEPS idea, W and H both have to become dividers on this side. So this side remains with all of these things that have to happen, but L now is by itself so that your formula solves for L. Okay. So now let's take a look at number 8, and number 9 you're going to work through on your own. But in number 8, I see 2 things happening in number 8 in order to get that variable b all alone. So I might want to underline b and see what's happening. I see multiplying on b, and I see subtraction happening on that side. We know that the first one we're going to have to undo is the subtraction. So in order to get that b alone, I'm going to have to add a c to this side and add a c to that side. When I do, the c's will zero out, and I will be left with a times b times x. 0 plus c is just c. Again, I still want to get b alone, and I've undone all the subtraction and addition that there was. Now I want to look to see if there's any multiply or divide to undo, and there's 2 multiplies on the letter b. So I have 2 things to divide off in order to get b alone. Dividing those, I've gotten b alone now, and I have c as a over x. So it'll be very surprising if you watch this video and only have 7 and 8 done and don't go try 9. That will indicate you're just copying, so don't do that. All right, we get to 12 and the later ones. They're using the percent proportion again to compare some things, but not only the percent proportion, but all proportions. So on 12 through 14, we did these 3, and you have samples from your in-class work that we practiced together. We did that one day in class. We had 3 problems on one side for the percent proportion. So get that practice sheet out and use it for that. When you get to 15, though, they're no longer talking about percents. I don't see a single percent in the problem. So the way we practiced these was to read through and see what types of numbers they were talking about. I see they're talking about people, and then later on, more things about people, and then something about buses, and then a question about buses. So what I noticed throughout this whole problem is they're making a comparison between number of people and buses. So what we did was we went over on the side and said that we're going to set up proportions, and they'll always have one of those quantities in the top and one in the bottom. It really doesn't matter which way you do this. We just need to know where you're going to be putting things, like a key. So now when I read through, the marching band has 211 people. They need to order buses. Then it says, how many buses will the band need? So 211 people in the band? I don't know how many buses. It doesn't tell me. But then it talks about a different fact that 60 people can fit on 2 buses. So therefore I have another people to buses situation that they've told me about. Then I want to solve using good cross-product skills. And then I need to think about that situational rounding. How many total buses will the band actually need in order to get there? Because this does not come out a nice whole number. So you want to think about whether you should round down or up. And it's not about what's closest, it's about what makes sense for everybody to be able to get on the bus. Number 16, same plan of attack. I read through about Mrs. Chpt, and I read that she can travel 100 miles, and then it tells me about time, hours. Then as I read through again, she's leaving Greendale, and it usually takes her 4 hours. They're mentioning hours again. So how many miles is that? So I keep seeing a comparison to miles and hours. So when I go to make my proportion, that's my proportion setup. I'm going to compare for both situations, miles and hours. So for the first thing, it says she can usually go 100 miles in 1.5 hours. Then I'm reading and she talks about taking 4 hours. So instead of guessing where that goes, I look and say, okay, she's talking about 4 hours and hours is a denominator value. Then they're asking about miles and miles is a numerator value. So therefore I can tell what I'm missing. Miles situationally can be done to decimals. So we can round here to a very close amount. I can talk about going 27.92 miles. That's okay. So when you get your answer, round to something that seems pretty reasonable, but you can have decimals for miles. So be sure to solve and show your work. Finally, dimensional analysis. We did this with cards where we worked on converting. And we're trying to convert 7 miles into inches. And so we laid this one out for you. And this one says that 7 miles multiplied by that fraction that converts it, multiplied by another fraction to convert it. So these aren't x's as variables, these are x's as multiply signs. And they'd like to know what that's equal to. And what we noticed was that not the numbers, but that the terms miles would cancel with the miles there. The term feet, the label, would cancel with the label there. The only label we'd have left is inches. And clearly that's the one we want, so it feels like that's a good thing. Then with all fraction multiplying, we would get on our calculators, we'd multiply the 7 by the 5,280 by any values in the numerator, because those are all multipliers, and divide by. Now, there's ones as all the divide by numbers, which won't change anything, so you're going to get a number and come back up. The last one, though, they want you to set one up. So they tell you that there are 8 furlongs in 1 mile. That's a fact. Furlongs are a distance in horse racing. They want us to set up and show that dimensional analysis. So they're checking the work and not just the answer to find the number of miles in 48 furlongs. So they started with 48 furlongs over 1 to make it a fraction, and they're saying they need to multiply by something. Much like that last example where we want the furlongs to drop out, cancel out, and we want miles to be left. So if I want to be able to cancel out furlongs here, furlongs needs to go in the denominator of my setup for my conversion. And then the equivalent number of miles will need to be in the top so that furlongs will cancel. They told us a fact that there are 8 furlongs in every 1 mile. So that's telling us where to put the 1 and the 8. Get the labels in first. I've canceled my labels, so now I have to go to my calculator and 48 multiplied by 1 divided by 1 divided by 8. So divider values are in the denominator. Then you can give your answer and make sure it has a label.